Okay, hello. I'm Jo Mauskopf, and I'm reading today, but I'm reading as on the part of Helen Stahl, who was going to read but is not able to read today. But she did provide the book and the reading material, and the book I'm reading from belongs to Helen. It's called Don't Bungee Jump Naked, and I hope you won't do that. It was just published this year, and it has a dedication to Helen in the front, saying, "To Helen, my #1 fan and former neighbor, keep laughing, Jeannie Robertson." And I hope all of you will keep laughing too. So first, I'm going to read a brief biography of Jeannie Robertson, for those of you who don't know of her. I thought it would be helpful if I included a brief summary of how my good fortune led me from a local beauty pageant in Graham, North Carolina, to convention halls across the USA, and eventually to theater shows. This brief review will also add a little background to many of the stories I selected for this book. My advice, read this part first, and you won't have to try to put it all together later. I was a rising junior at Auburn University in the spring of 1963 when I went home to Graham, North Carolina one weekend to enter the Miss Graham pageant. I had never done anything like that before. Growing up, I spent all my spare times playing basketball. There were 6 of us competing in the Graham pageant, sponsored by the local JCs, and we were all friends from high school. The night of the rehearsal, we joked about drawing for the title and the prizes. Of course, we didn't do that. At the conclusion of the pageant the next night, I was honored to be named Miss Graham and Miss Congeniality. Later that summer, I represented Graham in the Miss North Carolina pageant. At that time, it was the biggest state pageant in the nation, with 84 contestants, each of whom had won her own local pageant. The competition lasted 4 nights, with the final night broadcast on statewide TV. I think I stood out a little due to my height, and I was funny during the talent portion. I also seemed to click with the judges during my interview. Actually, it was fun. I won and started my year as Miss North Carolina the next day. This victory put me in the Miss America pageant in Atlantic City, New Jersey in September, or as we say in the South, the Miss America pageant. At 6'2" tall, I was the tallest contestant to have ever competed in the Miss America pageant. I didn't win. You already know that. If I had won the title of Miss America, I would have put it on the cover of this book. Pageants take a lot of criticism. Some is certainly justified, but much is not. Like many other activities we do in our younger years, being in a pageant doesn't hand you a career, but it sure gives a person the opportunity to develop skills for a lifetime. That certainly was the case for me. As Miss North Carolina, I was required to drop out of college for a year to make public appearances. I was paid for each one. Not much by today's standards, but I was paid. The good thing was that I was usually asked to say a few words. It took me about a week to realize that when I spoke, I could make people laugh. When they laughed, they seemed to enjoy my part on the program, and so did I. Pageants were huge at that time, and I developed a statewide reputation for being funny. After that year of speaking, often several times a day, I crowned the next Miss North Carolina, and the following week spoke at 3 events in the state, and I never looked back. Oh, I finished college. I returned to Auburn and eventually graduated with a teaching degree, using my pageant scholarship money to pay for the last 2 years. And I continued to give speeches most weekends. Being Miss North Carolina literally changed my life. It altered the direction of my career, led me into full-time professional speaking, and now into theater work as a humorist. As Morley Safer said in a 60-minute segment, Jeannie Robertson began her speaking career when she was Miss North Carolina in 1963, and no one has milked it for more. I've now been speaking professionally for more than 56 years, and I still love making the same point I made while traveling around as Miss North Carolina years ago. Look for humor. Of course, my stories have changed as my life has changed, but I'm proud of the fact that I have always written my own material based on what I see happening around me every day. It's been a great ride so far, and when my career ends or when the boat comes to take me away to the big stage in the sky, people should not be sad. I hope that they will think of me and laugh. Okay, now I'm going to read a few of her short segments in this book. And I might say that I apologize that my accent is not a North Carolina accent, but if you go onto YouTube, you can find a lot of segments of Jeannie Robertson herself. So you can get that part of her from the computer, but not this afternoon. This is a test. To illustrate that the first place to look for humor is in the mirror, I'll tell you some of the funny things that happened surrounding my recent femur surgery and long rehabilitation. To start with, I bet you'll want to know exactly how I broke it. Mountain climbing, snowboarding, bungee jumping. Any of those would make a great story, but the answer is none of the above. Here's exactly what happened. For more than 30 years, my husband, Left Brain, and I have had a holiday dinner for neighbors in a several block area, children always included, of course. We served that traditional Christmas meal of hot dogs and ice cream sundaes. Several years ago, in the afternoon of one of these hot dog suppers, I had taken more than 100 wieners out of the tight plastic packages and had them in a big bowl in my arms. I was bringing them into the house from a refrigerator out back. It's located in a little building out there, not in the yard. We're Southern, but come on. I came in through our game room door. In our house, game room is a fancy name for a garage with a ping-pong table. Somehow I slipped and sat down on my leg and broke my left femur straight across the top and right above my knee. It was awful and instantly changed my life for a year, if not longer. Oh, the pain. There I was on the game room floor, barely able to move. On top of that, when I fell, I apparently threw the bowl in the air in an attempt to save the wieners. They went flying and landed all around the room. Fortunately, I had my cell phone in a pocket and could slide it out. I called my husband to come downstairs fast. I called my assistant, Tony, to come back to our house fast. And I called my bestest friend, Norma Rose White, to come with her husband, Alan, as fast as possible. I thought if they could stand me up, something might pop back into place. I'm an old PE teacher. They all came, gave it a quick look, and suggested we call an ambulance, fast. In a matter of minutes, an ambulance arrived, and 2 emergency medical technicians were inside my house looking down at me. They turned out to be excellent at what they did medically, but they left the door open to the game room, and dogs were suddenly everywhere trying to get to the wieners. Any dog that was being walked in our area at the time broke loose. One dog from down the street ran into the room, jumped onto the sofa, bounded to the top of it, leaped through the air, and landed on me. My husband, on the scene by that point, actually exclaimed, "Wow, did you see what that dog did?" I did not respond. I simply stared at him. I was still on the floor, in great pain. That's when I learned that when you break a bone, people think you lose your hearing. One of the EMTs said to the other, "She's going to need some morphine, even to put her on the stretcher." The other one, looking down at me, answered, "She's going to need a lot of it. She's in a large body." A large body. I scooped up as many wieners as I could reach and threw them at him. One wiener went straight up in the air and came down on my face. The other landed on his shoulder. He was lucky the dogs didn't immediately jump at him. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and tossed the wiener across the game room. The dogs followed it like going after a thrown stick. I was still on the floor. My husband had the good sense not to ask if I'd seen that dog retrieve that weenie, although he asked the exact same question later. I explained to him that a dog doesn't retrieve something, it practically swallows whole. Apparently, there's a law about how much morphine can be in an ambulance at one time, or maybe they needed extra people to move such a large body. But before long, another ambulance arrived with more EMTs and morphine. Neighbors gathered outside. Dogs that were contained in backyards were barking and howling at the commotion. Tony shut the back door, but left-brain Tony, Norma, Rose, and Alan couldn't get the dogs that were inside to leave the wieners. Left brain was swatting at them with the broom. Two dogs almost got into a fight until left brain got two wieners, dangled them in front of their eyes, and tossed them in different directions. Clarification, he tossed the wieners, not the dogs. One to the far side of the game room and one up the hall, deeper into the house. I thought I was losing my mind. I started laughing, but forced myself to stop because it made it hurt more. I was getting loopy by then, but the two teams of EMTs eventually got me on a stretcher, and we headed outside, through the assembled neighbors, and finally into an ambulance. I felt like an athlete being carried off the court and gave everyone a thumbs up. A man I didn't know asked if his dog Corky was inside. I heard a voice say, "No, Corky's over here, I've got her." It was all a blur to me after my second morphine shot, but I was coherent enough to know when I was finally in the ambulance and we were set to leave. After all this happened and surgery was completed, my professional speaker buddies started calling, and each said about the same thing. "Okay, Jeannie, I heard what happened. 3 months of rehab. Are you going to be able to practice what you preach?" They meant, was I going to be able to find the humor in what had happened? Because looking for humor is what I believe in strongly and illustrate in my speeches and theater shows. It's also my belief that the first place to look for humor is in the mirror, right at ourselves. On the game room floor with all this commotion that day, I thought immediately, this is a test. The day of the break, my assistant Tony did come back fast, but my bestest friend Norma Rose and her husband Alan arrived quicker because they live nearer. Norma Rose still enjoys reminding me that while I was still on the floor waiting for the ambulance, I asked her to go in my office and bring me a pencil and a little tablet. I couldn't move, but I could think, and I sensed that I would need to take a few notes. Being Norma Rose, she wrote at the top of the tablet, "Norma Rose was here first." I thought about all this and the dogs and told my speaker buddies who were calling me that I had already started looking for the humor and had found some. By the time the ambulance was about to pull out of our driveway, our neighbors were everywhere. That's when a woman in our hood, who shall remain nameless in this book, but trust me, other women in my neighborhood know who she is, suddenly slapped her hand on the window next to the driver. "Wait, wait!" It made the driver jump. I think he had driven a hearse sometime in his life, and he startled easily. Then she shouted through the window for all to hear, "Ask Jeannie if the party's off." Okay, the next piece is called QVC. Looking for humor is so important to me that when I was transferred from the hospital to the rehab facility with a little TV on the wall, I made up my mind that for the next 3 months, everyone, from the custodians to the nurses to the physical therapists, would leave happier than when they came into my room. I was determined not to ring for a nurse unless absolutely necessary. I figured out later that they worried about me because they didn't hear from me. One day, the nurses at the nurses' station actually sent a new young nurse to my room to see if I was writing stories about them. No, I'm just trying not to bother everyone. One night during all this, I woke up near midnight and looked up at my little TV to see what game was on. Maybe something broadcasting from the West Coast, an earlier time zone. Evidently, during the day, I had turned the channel, no sports. Instead, there was a show on called QVC. QVC must have been on for decades, but I've never paid much attention to it. Here's why. In the 7th grade at age 13, barefooted with my hair mashed down, I was 6 feet 2 inches tall. I never thought the clothes featured on their program would work for me. That night, though, I decided to watch the show until I figured out the attraction. Several things became quickly evident. One, the lighting is perfect, especially on the jewelry. It's like the jewelry displays at airports where everything sparkles. Look up at the lights, see why. 2, the salespeople are good. They know what they're doing, and they're always excited about whatever a model walks out wearing. 3, the hosts on the show not only convince the viewing public that they have to have a certain item, but they also convince them they have to have it in several colors. Oh, look, that watermelon green is gorgeous too. Most important, they work the viewing public into a frenzy in order to convince them to purchase fast because there's a limited number of each item available. And that number is dwindling right in front of the viewer's eyes. Hurry, there are only 162 left. Whoops, it's down to 149. Amazing, I thought as I watched it all unfurl. Who could get taken in by all this? Then, about 45 minutes later, I found myself, a somewhat sane, level-headed person, leaning forward in the bed to better see what was on the little screen and thinking, I've got to have that brown poncho. It's long enough to cover my backside. And then I saw the number of items suddenly drop. Oh no, another 20 gone. My credit card and phone were in my purse, which was out of reach. The facility had provided me with a long grabber for situations such as this, but I had dropped it to the floor earlier, and it went under the bed. I needed a grabber to reach my grabber. The ponchos were selling like hotcakes in front of my eyes. Hurry, hurry. So in a panic, in the wee hours of the night, I reached over and rang for the nurse. I had never called for a nurse in the middle of the night. She came super fast. I was frantic when she entered the room. I began to point to the television. Oh, thank you for coming. Look, look, on that TV, that poncho is long enough for me. And they just told us it could be a poncho, a pashmina, or a picnic blanket. Could you please come around the bed and hand me my purse inside that drawer? It's right out of my reach, and I need my credit card. This kind member of the nursing profession immediately sized up the situation, came around the end of the bed, grabbed me by my shoulders, and shook me. Get a grip. We don't give credit cards to patients in the middle of the night when they're on heavy meds. It was a thanks I needed that moment. I pulled the covers up over my head. She cut off the TV and left. Home, sweet home. Eventually, even staying in a rehab place comes to an end. This means that one day people come into your room and tell you it's time to go home. Sort of. Someone came and inspected our house and listed a number of items we would have to change before they would release me. One of the main items that I had to have was a hospital bed on the lower level of the house because using steps was still out of the question. Left brain did everything we were told to do for me to go home. When the day came, I was transported to our den on the lower level, where I left brain had set up the rented hospital bed as instructed, and I settled in for the next stage of rehab. I guess I should also confess that I've been holding out on you about what else I was watching on television. In addition to hundreds of hours of sporting events, QVC, and tiny houses, I had also been watching another show during those rehab months, a show named Fixer Upper, Chip and Joanna. Are you ready to see your Fixer Upper? The show had swept the nation. I loved it. It took me about 3 hours in the hospital bed on the ground level in my own den to make a monumental decision. The entire wall to my right had to go, out, all of it, gone. We needed the neighbors who had been eating hot dogs all those years to come over for a big demo day. Why, left brain pleaded, why do you want to tear out a perfectly good wall in our house? Sometimes left brain just doesn't get it. Because, honey, open concept. Have you never watched Chip and Joanna? When I'm working in the kitchen, I need to be able to see through to the den to see the kids doing their homework. Left brain immediately protested. Jeannie, our son is 53. He lives in Georgia with his family. Have you lost your mind? Maybe it was my meds again. When left brain went upstairs, I immediately turned my attention to the left wall in the den, and I knew instantly the entire wall needed to be covered in, want to take a guess? You got it, shiplap. Those two savvy Texans, Chip and Joanna, have pulled one over on people in many areas of the country. They swear that old wood, shiplap, is like gold when it comes to remodeling, and people are buying into it. Newsflash. In North Carolina, we call the same type of wood planks from when a barn fell down. You can usually get some of these old boards for free if you ask first and are willing to haul them off. Okay. So we're moving out of her operations, her FEMA stage, and now this one is called Remember the Nantahala. Friends in our town once invited Left Brain and me to join a group for a fall weekend in the colorful North Carolina mountains. The trip included a 3-hour whitewater canoe excursion down the Nantahala River for those who chose to go. I was all in. Left brain wanted to spend the weekend in the mountains and eat the good food we knew was there, but he wasn't keen on the whitewater canoeing part. I talked him into it. We had never been in canoes except as children, barely moving along in calm lakes. But a couple of the men in the group knew all about it, having been in the Boy Scouts. They would be our leaders. They even owned a couple of canoes. We were to rent the others. We felt we would be safe and in good hands. What were we thinking? The Nantahala is a Class 3 river and at spots goes up to a Class 5. Simply put, these numbers mean that people should know what they're doing before hopping onto a raft or into a canoe, paddles in hand. The Nantahala can be tough, especially if you've never in your life canoed in rapidly flowing water. In hindsight, a little training might have been a good idea, but the die was cast when we accepted the invitation. We headed west on I-40, excited to be with each other and with friends on an adventure that would lead to fun memories. We dropped by the Nantahala the afternoon we arrived, scouting it for the next morning. We even checked out one of the most difficult rapids from a distance. At that point, Left Brain whispered to me, "I'm not doing this," but I convinced him it was a piece of cake. He tossed and turned and worried about it all night. The next morning, Left Brain and I and 4 of our friends were on the last canoe in our group, paddling down the Nantahala as though we had good sense. One of the Boy Scout guys was seated in the front of our canoe, paddling, maneuvering, and shouting directions as our little party brought up the rear of the entire expedition. Our leader wanted to be in the last canoe in case anyone in the larger group ahead of us needed assistance. 4 of us were in the middle of our canoe, and Left Brain was sitting in the back. He still wasn't sure about the whole thing, but he's always a good sport, and on this trip he didn't want to be the one who backed out. We were in our bright orange life preservers, paddling away and watching the water carefully. Rocks were around us, and rapids were up ahead. Whee! Looking back on it, I guess the Nantahala's terrain was typical. The river swirled along its path between steep embankments on either side. The water crashed against low rocks that made it noisy, causing us to point or shout at the top of our lungs if we needed to communicate with the others in our canoe. A high embankment was on our right, with trees lining the water. There was a 2-lane road at the top of the embankment on the left side as we faced downriver. Drivers on the road slowed to look at the canoes below, probably saying, "Look, in canoes, they must know what they're doing. Take their picture." We were engrossed in our paddling, eyes on the water, when one of the women in the middle of our canoe shouted over the roar of the water, "When you all get a chance, look up at the road on the left. There's a wild man in a life preserver running down the road, waving a paddle over his head." There was no "when you get a chance" to it. Immediately, we all looked up toward the road. Seconds later, we practically said in unison, "It's Left Brain." Stunned, the 5 of us turned to look at the back of our canoe. Sure enough, Left Brain was gone. Way back up the river, he'd been bumped from the back of the canoe into the swirling water. Later, he said he had shouted at us when he was bumped off, and shouted even louder as we paddled away from him. But with the noise of the rushing water, we hadn't heard him. He somehow slogged his way to the side of the river, climbed up the muddy embankment to the road by pulling on tree roots, and had been running to get in front of us, waving his paddle above his head the entire time. Cars had pulled off the road to get out of his way. Who could blame them? The 5 of us stopped paddling and waved our arms back and forth to get his attention. When we realized he knew that we had spotted him on the road, we started shouting and pointing to a spot ahead of at the base of the embankment where we thought we could connect. "Over there! Come down the bank, we'll pick you up." We paddled over ASAP like a family of beavers to the appointed place to wait for Left Brain to come down through the weeds and the mud. He could see we were in position below him, but he wasn't moving. Instead, he stood on the edge of the road, dripping wet from the river and perspiration, covered in debris, mud all over him, staring down at us. Finally, he wanted to make sure what he had been through, I guess, and shouted in our direction at the top of his lungs. "I've been running for over a mile to get in front of you." He cupped his hand over his mouth to make sure we heard that. "Over a mile." "Well, you made it. Come on, we've got to catch up." To which Left Brain shouted back, slowly enunciating every word, "Can everyone hear me?" The 5 of us shouted in unison, "Yes." Left Brain screamed, "Good. Hear this. I am not getting back in that canoe." Seconds later, we watched as Left Brain got in a car with kind-hearted tourists and rode away, waving his paddle at us out the window as they departed. I'm going to finish with the story that the book is named for, Don't Bungee Jump Naked. Left Brain and I truly do try to look for the humor every day. My travels for speeches and shows have given us ample opportunities to find it. Take our trip to Nanaimo, for example. If you look straight at a map of Canada, way over to your left, you'll find the town of Nanaimo, British Columbia. Left Brain and I arrived there late one morning with time to kill before we were scheduled to take a ferry to Vancouver. We still had our rental car, so we went to the Canadian equivalency of the Convention and Visitors Bureau in the States and found a nice, eager-to-please young woman behind the counter. "We have 5 more hours before we turn in our rental car and take a ferry," I told her. "What do you suggest we do in Nanaimo for 5 hours?" She swung into action, pulling out brochures and lining them up on the countertop. Suddenly she stopped, glanced at her watch, and gave us a big smile. "Oh, I know the perfect thing. Do you know where the terminal is located for the ferries?" We nodded. "Okay, go back to the terminal and turn left. You'll be on Highway 432, leaving Nanaimo. Drive south out of town a few kilometers, and you'll come to the Nanaimo River. That's what the town is named after. Turn left, and you'll soon see a man-made bridge across the river. It's called the Nanaimo Bridge, named after the river and the town." She glanced at her watch again, and her face lit up even more. "You've just got enough time. If the 2 of you hurry out there right now, you can bungee jump." Bungee jump, that's what she said. Bungee jump. Have you ever wanted to cup your hands lovingly around a young person's face, look straight in her eyes and ask, "Are you in there?" I wanted to say, "Look at us, look at us. Do we look like bungee jumpers?" Left Brain was 69 years old at the time. He was tall, thin, and had solid white hair, which was also thin. I was in my early 60s, not as thin as I once was, and my hair was clear old tweed number 14. Plain and simple, we looked our ages. Clearly, no one was going to be driving down the street, seeing us walking along, hit the brakes and say, "Look at that couple, I bet they bungee jump, or maybe skydive." I turned to left brain, raising my voice a decibel or two to make sure he heard me, because in complete honesty, left brain doesn't hear as well as he used to. I had said to him several times in blunt but kind tones, of course, "You need to get your hearing checked." His response was always the same: "I can hear as well as any man my age." My thought was always the same: "Big deal, you're almost 70. That's nothing to brag about." Anyway, I practically bellowed in his ear, "Left brain, do you know what she wants us to do?" He stared at me for a few seconds, trying to decide whether to be honest, and then he replied, "I don't believe I do." I took it up another decibel. "What she wants us to do, honey, is to go out to that bridge and put on some type of boots with elastic ropes and ties on them. Then, when we are secure, we go to the edge of the bridge and hurl our bodies off the bridge and drop headfirst into the water." 150 feet, the young woman interjected proudly and stood a little straighter. "Oh, thank you," I gushed as politely as I could. I was wondering how far we would get to drop. I turned back to left brain. "Honey, did you hear that? She said we'll get to drop 150 feet. Won't that be fun? And after we do that, we'll hang there upside down over the river until someone reels us up." Left brain got it and backed up a step. "I can't do that. My teeth will fall out." When the young woman heard this, she chimed in quickly to assure us. "Oh, no, sir, your teeth won't fall out. There's a man on the bridge with a little container. Before people jump, he has them take out their..." That's the one that's the right way round. Okay. I'm sorry. Oops, a bit softer. I wouldn't believe Wait, I said, "How many people do you have who jump headfirst off that bridge, but first have to take out their teeth and their hearing aids? Does someone shout through a bullhorn, 'Put your walkers against a tree'?" Left brain and I made eye contact and started laughing. The woman became defensive. "Will you get your money's worth?" she said, her bottom lip sticking out just a little bit. "You don't just drop upside down and sometime one pulls you up immediately. The bungee cord pops you, and then it becomes a ride. You swing over here." She swung an arm to her right like a pendulum in a clock. At the top of the arc, she brought her arm down and continued back to the left. "Then you swing over here." Now she was swinging her right arm to and fro, and you go back and forth and back and forth, and you do that until you eventually slow down and come to a stop. That's when you're hanging upside down over the water, and that's when they reel you up. She flashed a brilliant smile. "So you see, you get your money's worth." Bless her heart. She seemed oblivious that we were laughing as hard as we were, so hard that neither left brain nor I could speak. It was one of those times that if you tried to speak, you spit. He was the first one of the two of us to finally settle down enough to get words out. "I'm not going to hurl myself off a bridge, Jeannie, but I do want to go out there and see it." Well, when the young woman heard "see it," her eyes got big as saucers. Oh, sir, if you want to see it, you should come back the weekend after Valentine's Day. That's the weekend they raise money for charities, and people jump in the nude. Left brain nodded as though he understood, and then he turned to me and mumbled, "What'd she say?" I practically screamed so he would hear me. "Naked, naked. She wants us to leave North Carolina in February, where we have a chance of being warm, and come back to Canada where it's freezing, take off all our clothes and jump naked." We lost it again. I searched in my fanny pack for a tissue to wipe away tears of laughter. Left brain had both hands on the countertop, leaning over, his shoulders shaking with laughter. This time I was the first one to be able to speak. "Wait a minute, left brain, wait a minute. At our ages, with all the sagging areas on our bodies, this could be a good thing for us. If we can hang upside down naked long enough, it might knock a few things back in place." Left brain considered this, still laughing and shaking his head. "No, we can't do it because of that swinging part. The sagging areas of our body might start rolling and we're liable to slap ourselves silly." We made it back to the rental car, I don't know how. At first, we tried to hold back our laughter because we didn't want to hurt the young woman's feelings. But by the time we made it out the door, we were practically falling over each other, gasping for breath. As soon as left brain sat down behind the steering wheel of the car, "Mister, I can hear as any man my age," announced, "I do want to go right out there and see it, but I guarantee you one thing, you'll never get me to spongy jump." And right there is when I laughed so hard my water broke. And I wasn't even pregnant. If only I had $5 for every time someone said to me, "I can't believe you and left brain bungee jumped." Sometimes I let the comment slide, but mostly I tell them to please reread the story, or watch the story again on YouTube or the DVD, or find out if there's a streaming service, or listen to it again on their CD. We didn't jump. If you ever hear that left brain and I have bungee jumped, call the police fast. We were pushed. Thank you. And again, you can find a lot of these stories on YouTube. Have a good day and stay well, everyone.